Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. With apologies for the delay due to the weather, I welcome you all to this European Union press briefing ahead of the G8 summit to start a bit later today. The press briefing will be by President of the European Council, Herman van Rompuy, and President of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso. First, I would like to invite President van Rompuy to take the floor, please.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here in Locarno with President Barroso to represent the European Union. Thanks to the intense and effective preparatory work of Prime Minister Cameron and the UK G8 presidency, we have a good and innovative agenda. And the European Union is fully engaged and ready to contribute on all the issues. Let me briefly go through the main issues. First, on the global economy, the topic of the first session this afternoon. To our G8 partners, we will make clear that as far as Europe is concerned, the situation has improved in terms of financial stability, and that we are focused on getting Europe out of the economic crisis. The euro is no longer under existential threat. Financial stability has been restored, deficits have been halved, competitiveness is improving, and as a result, exports are picking up. Significant progress has been made towards integrating our financial framework, and we move forward on the completion of a banking union. The next European Council will be focused on combating youth unemployment at European and at national level. So our strategy, based on the following four pillars, is moving Europe in the right direction. The four pillars are preserving financial stability, measures with immediate impact to support economic activity in small and medium-sized enterprises and job creation, especially for the youth. Third pillar, making our economies more resilient through sound public finances and improved competitiveness. And we can now focus more on structural fiscal targets instead of nominal targets, and more on structural reforms in the labour and product markets. And the fourth pillar, strengthening the architecture of our economic and monetary union. Our economies will come stronger out of the crisis and the Eurozone more integrated. In addition to this strategy comes trade as another key driver of growth and employment, and President Barroso will elaborate further. We'll also discuss the economic situation in the other G8 economies that are recovering from the crisis and how individually and collectively we can contribute to promote global recovery and to fight unemployment. Then a few words on foreign policy. Later this evening, Prime Minister Cameron will host a working dinner on foreign policy. I expect that the appalling crisis in Syria will top our discussions. The European Union is convinced that we are at a critical juncture. After tens of thousands of dead, millions of displaced and refugees, we are in front of a fractured and radicalized Syrian society, with the crisis affecting and even threatening the whole region. The recent Russian-US initiative to launch a political process of negotiations based on the Geneva Principles of June 2012 constitutes the best and the only possible chance we have to halt this conflict, for which there is no military solution. The European Union has agreed for more than a year on the need to restart this process, and we have wholeheartedly supported this initiative from the outset. We will continue to work bringing the parties together to the table and to engage in genuine negotiations aimed at establishing a united, inclusive and democratic Syria. And we are fully aware of the difficulties, but we stay determined. At the same time, the Union and its member states continue to be the major international actor in addressing the humanitarian crisis in Syria and in the region. We have now provided up to more than 700 million euro in assistance, and a recent additional package of 400 million was announced by the Commission on the 6th of June so that we are the largest donor with more than 1 billion euro. Without a perspective of peace, the number of refugees could increase to 3.5 million by the end of the year. That perspective creates a heavy burden on the shoulders of all leaders. Tomorrow we will discuss some of the innovative issues put forward by Prime Minister Cameron, particularly on taxation and transparency. And during the final working lunch we will discuss also with other international leaders, including from Africa, issues like transparency in the extractive activities. Let me say a few words on tax fraud and evasion. These undermine the social contract in our democratic societies. In times of budgetary consolidation, they become more unacceptable than ever, and morally, politically, and financially unacceptable. At the 22nd of May European Council, European leaders agreed on a number of steps to strengthen transparency and equip their tax authorities with powerful tools to combat tax fraud and tax evasion. The European Union, who was and continues to be at the forefront on the automatic exchange of information between tax authorities, will be happy to bring its expertise to help designing and developing a global standard. We believe that the G8 can give a tremendous support in these and other areas like the OECD, base erosion and profit shifting project, to deal with also aggressive tax planning. On transparency, let me recall that also here the EU continues to be at the forefront and lead the way. The Council in April reached political agreement on the accounting directive that has disclosure requirements for the extractive and forestry industries. Before handing over to President Barroso, let me conclude by saying that I expect from the G8 a positive message for the global economy on growth, job creation and fighting unemployment. I expect a strong commitment to promote peace in Syria, plunged into a dramatic civil war. And I expect a clear message on our global determination to promote transparency and fight tax fraud and evasion. And finally, I expect significant progress when it comes to free trade with the TTIP between EU and the US as a trendsetter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to invite the President of the Commission.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The European Union is coming to this summit to promote a fairer world. Fairness at home, in the G8 countries, and fairness for people right around the globe. Firstly, we want fairness by further opening trade between free and open economies. Trade is a vital engine for growth, jobs, and development. This summit should give an unambiguous signal that it's worth every effort to deepen our trade relations and strengthen global openness in terms of trade. I'm delighted that the European Union, based on a consensus of all member states, has just agreed a broad mandate to start negotiations with the United States on the transatlantic trade and investment partnership. Still today, together with President Obama, we'll give the go-ahead for the start of negotiations between the United States and the European Union. The European Commission will negotiate on behalf of all our 28 member states. Our partnership will be a true game changer for the global economy. Secondly, this summit is about fairness in the way taxes are paid by individuals and by companies. Tax evasion and avoidance costs the European Union member states around €1 trillion every year, and the global bill is much higher. I expect this G8 summit to give a powerful signal that we are ready to look for those who do not respect the rules of the game and hold them accountable. And thirdly, we want fairness through greater transparency on land governance, extractive industries, open data. Citizens, in particular in resource-rich countries, have a right to get a better idea of what happens to their national wealth, to the revenues from their oil resources and forests, to know which amounts are paid by companies to governments, and so that they can control the dark channels of corruption. Knowing about this is a precondition for acting upon it and to allow good governance to flourish. In all these areas, the European Union has a very good story to tell and is often pioneering the global agenda in these G8 summit priorities. Let me just give you a few examples. Our bilateral trade agreements are not in contradiction with our multilateral ambitions and certainly do not replace our commitment to the World Trade Organization and the Doha Development Agenda. Indeed, they are a stepping stone towards further liberalizing global trade and strengthening the multilateral trading system. We are fully engaged with our partners to conclude a WTO trade deal in Bali in December, with trade facilitation at its core, delivering a huge positive impact for developing and least developed countries. Other examples. Just last week, the European Union has agreed far-reaching binding legislation for transparency in extractive industries and forestry. This will help developing countries to stamp out corruption and better collect domestic revenues. To further the G8 transparency agenda, the European Union also engaged in new country partnerships with Colombia, Niger, and South Sudan in the areas of extractives and land transparency. Also last week, the European Union passed legislation to further open up public data, because we believe that open data means opening business opportunities and creating jobs. We are also the world's largest donor for development assistance, with a specific emphasis on food security. And I'm happy that we are to have the opportunity to discuss this with international partners, namely our African friends. I'm proud in this context that the European Commission has just been awarded the Jacques Diouf Prize of the World Food Organization for our commitment to food security. And last but not least, we are a driving force behind the new political momentum in the fight against tax evasion and avoidance. In Europe, we are leaving no stone unturned to see where taxes are paid and how much taxes are paid by individuals and companies. In Europe and at global level, we want that everybody pays its fair share of taxes in a transparent way. I hope that bank secrecy and tax havens will soon belong to the past. Just last week, we have proposed a maximum extension of the scope for the automatic exchange of information among European Union tax authorities. Let's not forget that already since 2005, European Union member states have been exchanging information on taxes and finances under the EU Savings Taxes Directive. That directive, together with its network of international agreements, has been the most advanced international approach for the past 8 years. In our proposal for extending the scope of the automatic exchange of information, we are now including, most notably, dividends, capital gains, and account balances. They will all be covered. As a result, the European Union will have the most comprehensive tax information exchange system in the world. We want to wipe out already by 2015 the last white spots on the European Union's tax map. We are convinced that there is a need to improve tax governance everywhere, and this G8 summit should foster a unity of purpose at the global level. We will fully support the work of the G8 UK presidency, the OECD, and the G20 in this regard. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that I'm looking forward to open, frank, informal exchanges on these and other topics. This is my 9th G8 summit since Gleneagles, held in 2005, also under UK's presidency. I'm confident that, like Gleneagles, also this summit here in Loch Earn will provide important political impetus for global change towards global fairness, including for the poorest countries. And let me finally congratulate the UK G8 presidency for the choice of the venue, Northern Ireland. The summit places on the global stage the efforts of the people and leaders of Northern Ireland, supported also by the European Union. Since 1995, the European Union has been actively supporting, also from a financial point of view, the peace efforts. This is a clear signal to the world that peace and reconciliation have returned to this most beautiful and hospitable part of Europe. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now open the floor for questions. I see a question there on the third row.
Marco Zatrin, La Stampa, Italy. I have two questions related to economy for the two presidents, if I may. President Van Rompuy, you mentioned the fact that the EU has been restoring financial stability, but in the past few weeks, we've seen the markets jittering, we've seen the bonds yields going up. And 1 week from the European summit and waiting for the Karlsruhe decision, do you read these signals as a kind of skepticism towards what the European Union can do? And second thing, on tax evasion, is the European Union ready to support a country-by-country scheme for multinational corporations in order, as far as profits and taxes are related? Thank you.
On the first question, there is no comparison between the current situation and the situation, let's say, 9 months ago, where the euro and the eurozone was under existential threat. That isn't the case anymore. Of course, there will be all the time turbulences, uncertainties, anxieties, and so on. But this situation, you can't compare them with the situation of the summer of last year. Of course, we have to continue our work at the level of the member states and at the level of the European Union. And for the next European Council, we will show that we continue our work, for instance, on the banking union. After the major achievement of creating a single supervision for all the banks all over Europe, now we are working on resolution, first on a directive, harmonizing the resolution schemes all over the 27, and then finally working for a single resolution authority, a mechanism all over the Union. So this is in the pipeline, and we are credible because we realized already that single supervision for all banks in the Union, and we are making a lot of progress on the different directives, on resolution and on deposit guarantee schemes, and I'm sure that before the end of the parliamentary cycle, as we stated in conclusion of the European Council, we'll find an agreement also on the single resolution mechanism. Banking union and the credibility, making progress on banking union is absolutely key for maintaining the financial stability in the Eurozone.
Regarding the other question, indeed, increased transparency concerning the activities of large companies and groups appears necessary in order to protect revenues and ensure confidence and fairness. In the European Union, we have already introduced rules on this for banks in the context of the Capital Requirements Directive, CRD4. These rules will enter into force on the 1st of January 2014. As regards reporting by other companies, the May European Council concluded the following, and I quote, "The proposal amending the directives on disclosure of non-financial and diversity information by large companies and groups will be examined, notably with a view to ensuring country-by-country reporting by large companies and groups." End of quote. In this context, the European Commission is considering, and I'm personally in favor, of the extension of these obligations also to financial matters. So a country-by-country information of the taxes paid by companies, namely transnational companies.
Thank you very much. We have time for a second question. I see the gentleman on the third row.
Hi, this is Bill Schomburg from Reuters. I have a question for both Mr. Barroso and Mr. Van Rompuy. For Mr. Barroso, a question about the planned EU-US free trade agreement. Does the fact that France has secured the cultural exception for the negotiations increase the likelihood that the United States will seek its own exceptions or carve-outs from the talks, and that would potentially weaken a final deal? And when will the talks begin, and how long do you realistically expect them to take to reach a final deal? Is the end of 2014 still the realistic target? And for Mr. Van Rompuy, a question about Syria, if I may. You talked a little bit about this in your opening remarks, but the United States says it has evidence that chemical weapons have been used and it intends to supply arms to the rebels. Does this change the calculus in Europe in any way? And do you think there is now sufficient backing among EU member states to support arming the so-called moderate rebels?
First of all, regarding the cultural diversity, let me be very clear about this. Since the beginning, the Commission has stated that cultural diversity in the European Union should be promoted. In fact, this is a legal obligation. The European Union has signed and ratified the UNESCO Convention on Cultural Diversity, and in our treaties, the cultural diversity protection, what some call the cultural exception, is indeed protected. So it was never proposed by the European Commission an idea of putting in question this cultural diversity on the European side. On the contrary, I believe it is necessary. I believe that cultural goods are not exactly like other kind of goods, and so it is legitimate for governments, in some cases also for the protection of linguistic diversity, for example, to have quotas or subsidies for some forms of culture. This was never in question in the mandate that the European Commission presented to our member states. What there was discussed was how far should be the mandate. And it has been agreed unanimously by the member states that audiovisual services are presently not part of the mandate. However, it has also been explicitly agreed that the Commission has the possibility to come back to the Council with additional negotiating directives at a later stage. So we can go back to the Council and request it to be covered should progress in discussions with the United States warrant this. So I hope this is understood by our American partners, and indeed we are going to launch in some minutes these trade negotiations, and I'm very happy with the result of the Council of Ministers. Now, let's be frank. 2 years ago, very few would have bet that we'll be able, United States and Europe, to launch this free trade and investment partnership. Very few would have bet that. But thanks to the commitment on both sides, that is going to happen. Now, I cannot predict exactly how long the negotiations are going to last. We have said since the beginning that we should expect around a couple of years. But more important than speed is substance. They are certainly huge negotiations with many sensible issues on both sides. What is important, I insist, is the political will on both sides. I believe this can be a game changer, not only for the transatlantic area, the United States and Europe, but for the world. Because these are the two biggest economies in the world. So if we can have a real free trade area between these two areas, that will be a great contribution for openness, and that can give a boost not only to the economies in Europe and the United States, but also to other parts of the world. Because, as you know, because of the integration of the supply chains now in the world, what can be good for the ones can also be good for the others. So I'm very confident about this agreement. We expect the negotiations to start as soon as possible, so most likely July, and then we will see if we keep the same commitment that we have shown now.
Thank you. On Syria, the assessment, the US assessment on the use of chemical weapons makes even more urgent our repeated calls for an agreement to immediately deploy a UN verification mission to investigate these allegations on the ground. At the same time, these developments can only reinforce the importance of a political solution and should accelerate the efforts of the international community to find a definitive political solution to the conflict. And I trust that this G8 summit will allow us to advance substantially in this direction and will contribute to the launch of the Geneva II process we are all calling for.
Thank you very much. We have time for a very last question. I see the lady on the second row.
Thank you. Rebecca Christie from Bloomberg. I wanted to ask about the economy. You mentioned in your opening remarks, President Van Rompuy, that exports have increased. And I'm wondering what Europe is doing in terms of domestic demand, particularly given that Japan is taking such aggressive actions to increase its exports and weaken its currency. Are you concerned about currency wars, and are you concerned that the global economy might be held back by Europe's lack of domestic demand?
First of all, it's important that we improved competitiveness, certainly in the weak economies, and we see that in these weak economies, exports are going up. And that's already a positive sign in itself. On internal demand, let me remind you that, for instance, on fiscal consolidation, because we have already achieved what we have achieved, halving the fiscal deficits, we can show now more flexibility. And for 2013, for instance, the structural improvement will be 0.75 instead of, in 2012, 1.5. So slowing the pace of fiscal consolidation, precisely because we were successful in terms of fiscal consolidation. That's helpful for internal demand. We are also working on targeted measures aiming the credit access of small and medium-sized enterprises, because one of the bottlenecks of economic growth today is related not only to internal demand, but also to the supply side, and especially to credit access. And so we will come up at the next European Council with concrete proposals to facilitate credit access for small and medium-sized enterprises. In some of our bigger economies, wages are going up. That's also important for boosting internal demand. But you can't compare, Madam, the situation in the Eurozone started with the sovereign debt crisis. You can't compare this with situations in other parts of the world. So what we are doing is more long-term, with a long-term objective, strengthening the resilience of our public finances, strengthen the resilience of our economies, and where we can, by targeted measures and showing flexibility in fiscal policy, to boost economic growth. We know that economic growth will not be sufficient, although it will be positive economic growth next year for between 1.0 and 1.5. It will not be enough to substantially decrease unemployment, especially the unemployment of the youngsters. That's why we are working hard at the level of the member states and the level of the Union to decrease the level of young unemployed people. Again, by targeted measures, and that's why we have foreseen in the multi-annual financial framework already those 6 billion. But a lot of our member states are working also on youth employment initiatives. We will also give the opportunity to the European social partners at the European Council to show what they agreed upon, also to boost employment of young people. So it is a rallying effort, it is a mobilizing of all the means we have to combat especially youth unemployment, because we will have growth next year, but not sufficient to dramatically decrease the level of unemployment.
Thank you very much. That was the last question and the last answer. I thank you for your attention and patience. Have a good summit.